I would like to introduce to you to the member of Fairfax in the House of Representatives, a member of the House of Representatives Economic Committee, member of the House of Representatives Infrastructure Committee, our federal leader of the Palmer United Party. Please give a big welcome to Mr. Clive Palmer.
Thanks very much. Men and women of Western Australia, this election is the election that Western Australia has been waiting for. An opportunity to put Western Australia into the balance of power. We all know who the Prime Minister is. We all know who the opposition leader is. This election won't change the government, but it can change your lives. If we put Western Australia into the balance of power in the Senate, we can use that power for the benefit of nobody else but Western Australia. A vote for Labor or a vote for Liberals will achieve nothing. It won't change a thing. But a vote for Palmer United will put Western Australia in the balance of power. For too long has the balance of scales in this country been weighted against Western Australia. For too long have all Western Australians carried the rest of Australia on their back. The mining tax has destroyed the investment in Western Australia, has given the perception that Australia does not welcome overseas investment. The mining tax must be abolished. The carbon tax has pushed up electricity prices to levels unprecedented in our history, where old people struggle to meet their electricity bills and can't afford heating in winter. Prices that allow the government to cover up the cost of inefficiency in government. High electricity prices benefits no one. They just destroy enterprise, take jobs, and destroy our standard of living. For nearly 6 months, the Liberals have been impotent to repeal the mining tax and the carbon tax. Only Palmer United can do it. Only our party has the numbers in the Senate. If Tony Abbott wants the mining tax gone, if he wants the carbon tax gone, like we do, he'll have to support Western Australia in the future. Western Australia needs to give a clear message to the Greens who have destroyed Western Australian economy and are seeking to turn Western Australia into another Tasmania. Now's the time to stop the Greens. If we put Western Australia in the balance of power by voting for our team in the Senate, we stop them dead in their tracks. There's never been a more desperate attempt in Australian history to destroy democracy than the vanishing ballot boxes in the 2013 election in Western Australia. It seems that Uri Geller was a scrutineer. Or did someone just pick them up and run for it? Or did someone come back late at night with a key and remove them? We all know they were there and then they were gone. We don't need investigation, we need an arrest. How desperate are the powers to be to stop our party that they would interfere with the democratic processes in this country? It's time to stick it up the AEC, to return Palmer United senators to the Senate, to protest in the strongest possible way about the AEC's incompetence and corruption. It's time to restore democracy to Western Australia and elect Palmer United senators at this election. The Liberal and Labor politicians who have ripped off the GST out of Western Australia and sent it to Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart are traitors to their communities and they need to be removed. All the GST collected in Western Australia needs to be spent in Western Australia. Why should Western Australia lose its AAA credit rating? Just to prop up the credit rating of New South Wales and Victoria, because that's what's happened in the last year. Palmer United is determined to use its numbers in the Senate to get a fair deal for all Western Australians and get all the GST collected in Western Australia returned and spent here for your way of life and for the future of our children. We must put Western Australia in the balance of power. We believe that the mineral resources of this state should be processed here in Western Australia. If you take nickel, for example, it sells for $50 a tonne as ore, but $20,000 a tonne or $16,000 a tonne depending on the market in Japan and Korea. How can it be when the Japanese suffer from the tyranny of distance, when they use our energy which costs them more, when their labour prices are higher, that they can get more money for our resources than we can get them? How incompetent, how hopeless is Abbott and our government that we don't get the investment We don't get the value adding here, and we don't get the jobs here. We want to see Western Australian minerals processed in this state. Australia needs to be strong in what it can do. It needs to supply the world, not with just ore, but with finished minerals, and that can happen in Western Australia. We've got to return the wealth to the countries and the nations of the world that produce it. That's the system we live in. Our state in Western Australia produces more wealth from anyone else in Australia. With 11% of the population, it only receives 5% of the wealth back in this state. And that's a disgraceful thing. We need to change the way we look at incentive in Australia, the way we look at incentive in Western Australia. There was a time once when we had zonal taxation that worked in this country, allowed people to go to areas where they could produce more, allowed our country to be decentralised and our wealth to grow again. We've got to look at our whole taxation system. And you've seen in the advertisements we've shown today that in the forward estimates for this year, over $70 billion will be collected in provisional tax in Australia. That's money that's collected by the government before it's earned. If we abolish the date to pay our provisional tax in the future and say that it's payable at the end of the year, we'll leave $70 billion more in our economy. Why are our small businesses suffering? Why isn't there enough cash to grow and expand? Because the government's grabbed your money. And if the government doesn't get that money, it'll cost them about 2.5% more, or $800 million in the 12 months. But every time that $70 billion turns over in our economy, they get 10% GST. So if that $70 billion turns over 3 times, they'll get $21 billion. And the government argues about revenue. They say we haven't got enough for our schools, for our hospitals, and for all the things we really need for doctors in the community. Said we've got to have austerity. It's all a lot of rubbish. It's just about control, to control this population, to stop it from growing and stopping prosperity. We're the only country in the world that has a provisional tax system which soaks up all the capital of businesses before they've even earned it. How can we compete unless we get that $70 billion back in the economy? Imagine how many jobs can be created. Imagine how many people can be employed. Imagine the money we'll save in Centrelink every year by creating enterprise in the future. Every time we build more houses, we have to pay 10% GST. That economic activity not only provides jobs, it provides more revenue for you. So why shouldn't Australians have a higher level of home ownership? There was a time when we led the world in home ownership. Not anymore. Not since they've stuffed up the system in this country, and it's time for a change. We need also to abolish the fringe benefits tax. They thought they'd get a lot of fringe benefits tax, but they didn't, because all the companies said you can't have lunch anymore, and everyone brought their apple and sandwich to work every day. More restaurants closed, more people were unemployed, and there was no business done. But the worst thing that happened when they introduced the fringe benefits tax on restaurants was that our business activity index fell by 50% in the following 3 years. We've got to recognise that people exchanging ideas, working on things that they can do, creating wealth is what we've got to encourage in our country, because it's very, very important. Going to lunch in a commercial sense brought people together, creating to think about ideas, hopes and dreams and what they could do, and the people that they could employ. But the public servants in Canberra, they were stuck with an orange and a lemon every day for lunch. They had a bitter taste in their mouth, and they want everybody else to suffer. I want this country to get bigger. I want your lives to get better. We've got to project for the future as to what we can be. We go forward today with the Senate candidates that we've got here behind me with only one thing in mind, and that's service of the community, with history as our only reward. What we need in this country is more love and forgiveness, more compassion. We need to rise above our prejudices and to seek a better and a stronger and a newer world. Let's make Western Australia all it could be. And let's remember those immortal words of John F. Kennedy in 1962, when he said that we all are mortal, that we all live on this one small planet, that we all breathe the same air, and we all want a good future for our children. In the final analysis, we as Australians have more in common than divides us. If we all unite together, we can achieve a lot for each other. So let us try to do that. Let us make Australia all it could be, and together we can achieve the extraordinary. Thanks very much.